So this morning we're continuing the series that we started last week, which we called Purpose Built. And remember that our key focus in this series is that we as a church have a purpose, that there is something that God has called us to do. And there are times in your life when you're trying to figure out your purpose, your individual purpose. Sometimes that's really challenging because, how do you know what you're supposed to do? But as a church, it's actually pretty easy to know what we're supposed to do. You know why? Because someone told us. Jesus told us exactly what we're supposed to do. And we talked about that a little bit last week about kind of the detailed version of what he told us. But we could boil it down to something really short. Right? Our purpose is to inspire people to pursue and find life in Jesus. That is our purpose. That is why we exist. And it's so important to understand that's why we exist, because if we don't know why we exist, how do we decide what to do? Because the thing that makes the church so amazing, the global church so amazing, but even more importantly, in my opinion, the local church so amazing, is that although we think of church as one body, in reality, church is a group of people coming together to do something. And if we don't know what our purpose is, what are we going to do? We're all going to decide on our own what we want to do as an individual. And if everybody decides on their own, it's going to be really hard to walk in the same direction. But if we understand what our purpose is, we have the opportunity to actually take our individual gifts and then come together with other people as they share their individual gifts. And then through that, we work together in that common direction to do far more than we could ever do by ourselves. And that's so important because if we're not all working in the same direction, we're never going to get there. Right? So that's what we're really kind of looking at throughout this series. Now, a key thing, though, is that if we're pursuing the purpose of the church, if we're working to fulfill that, but we're all different people, what do we have to do in order to make that work effectively? We have to put our differences aside. That we have to choose that we are not going to make decisions based on what I want. We're going to make decisions based on what we have been called to do. And the reason that's important is that life is so much more fulfilling when we don't focus on what I want, but instead do what we're called to do. And that's not news. You all know that. We all know that. Life shows us that. If you've ever been part of any team, you know it's more fulfilling to be part of something bigger than yourself. I mean, if you've had a job, right? All of us have had jobs. If you're working together towards something, you start to do more because there's more of you working on it. If you've been part of a sports team, right? The fulfillment of winning as a team is so much bigger than just doing your own thing. Because you do what you do well, somebody else does what they do well, and as we all do that, we do more. But it kind of moves through our entire life. I mean, you ever been part of any complex project, an academic project, a building project, an engineering effort, where we do more together than we can do separately. And in that, we find greater fulfillment than we can find on our own. And it doesn't have to be something big either. I had a chance recently to talk to some of the folks who used to be part of our prayer shawl ministry. A group of people sitting around together, knitting shawls that would be saved to be given to people at hard times in their life. Medical issues, emotional issues, loss. And the fulfillment of doing that was way better than just sitting at home alone, knitting by yourself. Because you're doing something meaningful along with other people. And you produce something that's more. So how do we lift that up to the entire purpose of the church, the entire call on our church? Well, I think there's one key area I'd like to talk about today that I think is a key area of need. I think it's an area that gets overlooked by most churches. And that's the importance of connecting with people in transitional places in their faith journey. People who are brand new to faith, who've kind of decided that they want to do the faith thing, but they don't really know what it means. Or maybe people who are still searching and going, well, I'm looking for deeper meaning. I don't know if I buy into this whole faith thing, but maybe. Or people who've been pulled away and are now trying to make some other transition. Or, unfortunately, as so often happens, people have had things in their life that either cause them to fall away or be driven away. Something happens that hurts them, and they're now trying to return. Because the reality is that there is a huge population of people who are in transitional parts of what we would call a faith journey. All the way from I'm not sure if I even want to be on it, so I've just gotten on the on-ramp, to I'm early in the drive, sort of thing. And unfortunately, I think that churches in general don't really focus on meeting the needs of those people. Because I think what happens in general is that where do churches put their focus? On church people. And if we put our focus on church people, that means that we unintentionally create an environment that is uncomfortable to non-church people. We unintentionally create an environment that may be unappealing to non-church people. Because let's face it, we say funny things. We believe funny things, right? If you're not part of a church culture, if you did not grow up in church, saved by the blood, that sounds terrible, right? That sounds scary. Washed in the blood, no thank you, right? Right, but to us that means something very, very different. We need to be mindful of those things. Because if we're going to do what Jesus called us to do, inspire people to pursue and find life in Jesus, the reality is that we need to prioritize the needs of people in those situations, that we need to do what we can to make it easier for people in early stages of faith or transitional stages of faith. We need to make it easier for them to get connected. We need to make an intentional effort to make them feel comfortable, accepted, and welcome. Because the natural thing for someone who walks into a church who has never been in a church before, or has not been in since they were a very young child, is to instantly feel out of place. Instantly. And so we have to work at making sure that they don't feel out of place. Now, I know that for those of us who've been part of church for a long time, those of us who sometimes can't even really think about life without church sometimes. When you hear someone like me say what I just said, that can be difficult to hear. Because I think the natural reaction is that, hold on a minute. This is my church. I put my time in here. I put my money in here. Aren't I first? Shouldn't I be at the front of the line? I mean, that's how most of life works, right? You work at a job for a long time, you get seniority. You get first pick at vacation. You get more vacation time. Right? You work in an organization or an academic environment, you get tenure. And you get priority over other people. That's how the rest of life works. But Jesus was abundantly clear that that is not how church is supposed to work. So what should we do? How do we go about this? How do we address this tension that exists in church? About, I've been here a long time, I should get what I want. Why am I not first? Well, whenever I have a question like this, I always ask the same person, the Apostle Paul. If we look at the New Testament, and we look at the letters that the Apostle Paul wrote, what was the subject of the overwhelming majority of his letters? Church problems. I mean, you figure that, like half of the New Testament or more is basically dealing with church problems. So the good news is they're not new, right? It's been the same challenges all along. So I want to take a look at a brief excerpt from a letter the Apostle Paul wrote to a church located in Rome. It's what we know as the book of Romans in the New Testament. And in the church that was in Rome back in the first century, it was kind of an amazing church because it was located in the heart of Rome, which was the heart of the Roman government, a pagan government. Yet it was a church that was thriving, and it actually had become the home of a number of very mature believers. And it was a strong church in spite of all these obstacles. But then new believers started coming in. And those new believers were having struggles. And were having trouble fitting in. And were having trouble being sure what they're supposed to do. And the mature believers were like, well, we don't need to change for them. Right? They're joining our club. So the Apostle Paul felt the need to write a letter and talk about that. And that's what we call the book of Romans. So on this issue of the mature believers being frustrated by the needs of the new believers, here's what Paul has to say. Those of us who are strong and able in the faith need to step in and lend a hand to those who falter, and not just do what is most convenient for us. Strength is for service, not status. Each one of us needs to look after the good of the people around us, asking ourselves, how can I help? So Paul says that the responsibility of those that are mature in faith is to serve those who are new to faith, to serve those who are in transitional phases in their faith. The responsibility of those who are mature in the faith is to not focus on what's most convenient for us, to not focus on what's most comfortable for us. Our responsibility is to help those that are in transitional places, those who are new to faith, who are struggling with their faith, trying to understand faith, trying to decide if they even care about faith. That's our responsibility. It's our responsibility to inspire them, right? Not talk them into, not convince them, inspire them to pursue and find life in Jesus. So this week, as we continue our series here in part 2, what I want to talk about is connection points. How do we get connected? How do we as a church help people to feel connected? How do we help this huge group of people who are exploring faith, new to faith, transitioning in faith, returning to faith? How do we do that? How do we make sure that they feel welcome and they feel comfortable? How do we make sure that they have the space to grow the way they need to and grow at their own pace? How do we help them discover or rediscover the power and joy of a relationship with God? How do we help them discover or rediscover life in Jesus? That's what I want to look at today. Now, as you recall, when we kicked off the series, we're kind of walking through this whole attitude of pursuing our purpose by using the book of Ruth. Now, I will admit, the book of Ruth is one of the most favorite books of mine in the Bible. There are times I will just sit down and read that book. It's really short. I think it's 4 chapters, if I remember right. And it's kind of this book with just incredible depth. Because on the surface, it just kind of sounds like the story of this woman Ruth and a bunch of things go on. But kind of every time you read it, you see that there's more and more inside of there. And there is more and more depth to be found in there. Now, as you recall, this actually takes place about 3,000 years ago. So about 1,000 years before Jesus. It takes place in the region at the time was known as Judah. It's the same place as Israel is at today. And it actually is in a town that's pretty familiar for most of us, Bethlehem. So it kind of originates in this region of Bethlehem. But again, this is about 1,000 years before Jesus. And it's an ancient narrative, right? So basically, when we started the story, we met this woman named Naomi. As you recall, she was married, had 2 kids, living in the region of Bethlehem. But it was a time of great turmoil. Famine breaks out. So she and her family move far away to another country named Moab. It's about 800 miles or so from where she lived. Would have been a world away for them. Remember that they lived there for many years. Her sons got married to Moabite women. But there was also tragedy. Very early when they got there, her husband died. Years later, both of her sons died. And this is a very patriarchal society, a society where it's almost impossible for a woman to survive on her own. So now they're in trouble. So they hear that things are better back in Bethlehem. So Naomi decides to go back, and after some conversation, one of her daughter-in-laws goes back to her family, but her other daughter-in-law, Ruth, stays with Naomi. So now Naomi, this woman who's from the region of Bethlehem in Judah, is heading back to a place that she knows. Ruth is heading to a place she knows nothing about. But she's committed to the family that she's in. She's committed to her family with Naomi. So they head back. And as you may recall, at first Naomi was very excited, but then Naomi started to realize that going back to where I used to be is not going to be like it used to be. It's going to be hard. But it seemed like the best option, so she does. So as we pick up this week, Naomi and Ruth are now in that region of Bethlehem. And what's kind of interesting for us to think about, Naomi and Ruth would have had two very, very different experiences. When Naomi got back to Bethlehem, what is she going to find? The familiar comfort of what she knows. She's still got lots of challenges. Her life is filled with challenges, but at least it's familiar and comfortable. What is it for Ruth? It's foreign. It's uncomfortable. It's going to be challenging because everything is strange to her. She doesn't know what any of these customs are. Right? And that's the world that she has stepped into. So these two women are now together. Naomi, a much older woman. We have the indication that Ruth is actually still a pretty young woman. And so they're back. At least they're back in kind of this familiar land. But Naomi and Ruth have a problem. The famine has ended, but they weren't there to tend any crops, to grow anything. So they haven't grown any food. And they don't have any resources. They can't even buy food or trade for food. So they're in a place that has what they need. How are they going to get it? So as we pick up the narrative, one day Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, "Let me go out into the harvest fields to pick up the stalks of grain left behind by anyone who was kind enough to let me do it." Naomi replied, "All right, my daughter, go ahead." Now, remember I mentioned that the book of Ruth, the more you read it and the more you understand, the more you see is in it. As you look at that, it seems like just a simple exchange. Well, maybe I can go out and pick up some food. Maybe it'll be okay. And Naomi says, okay, give it a try. But that's not at all what actually happens. What's happening is so much more involved than that. Now, remember that Ruth doesn't know the customs of the region. So Ruth is like, well, maybe I can go out and maybe some nice person will let me gather. But Naomi actually knows it's far better than that. Because we have to remember that the people living in Judah are the descendants of the ancient Hebrews. In other words, they're the people who followed Moses out into the desert. The people of Judah live under what we call Mosaic Law. It's the book of rules that's at the beginning of the Old Testament. And the reason that's important is that Mosaic Law actually makes certain provisions for the poor. Mosaic Law says you have to do things to help the poor. Part of what it says is that if you are a landowner growing food, you have to leave food behind for the poor. You have to leave the edges of your field unharvested so the poor can come along and pick things up. As well as if in the process of harvesting you drop anything, you have to leave it there so the poor can come along and pick it up. So when it sounds like Ruth is saying, I'll give it a try, and Naomi says, go ahead and give it a try, this is actually capturing the fact that Ruth thought she had to go out and give it a try. And Naomi is saying that, no, you can go do that. That's okay. That we actually make provisions for that here. We have a way to help you with that. And so now, as Ruth goes out, she's still got to do the work. I'm sure it's still really uncomfortable, but at least it's within the norms of the culture. So Ruth heads out to gather the grain, and what she would have had to do is probably travel a little bit, because you wouldn't put the fields right in the center of the town. You put the fields just kind of outside the town. So Ruth heads out, and she sees some people working in the fields. And kind of the way you would normally gather is you would kind of work behind the paid workers. So that way you would find what they left behind. So she ends up in this one field, walking behind the paid workers, gathering up what she can. And while she's there, it turns out she's at a field belonging to a man named Boaz. Now, when we first meet Boaz is a person who instantly stands out. So to pick up the narrative, while Ruth was there, Boaz arrived from Bethlehem and greeted the harvesters. "The Lord be with you," he said. "The Lord bless you," the harvesters replied. Now again, on the surface, it appears that Boaz is just kind of walking up, just kind of saying, "Hey, what's going on?" Right? But Boaz is described as a man of great wealth and great stature. And as a man of great wealth and great stature, clearly a landowner, he would be in the top tier in the social environment of that space. The people who are harvesting his fields are day laborers, kind of the other end of the social environment. So because of Boaz's status, he has every right to ignore those workers. He pays people to deal with them. He doesn't have to. But what does he do? He walks out to them, meets them where they are, and says, "You are important to me. I see you. The Lord be with you." That would have instantly made Boaz stand out to those workers. But who else do you think he would stand out to? He certainly would have stood out to Ruth. Because Boaz had every right to demand the privileges of his status, ignore those people, and just let his foreman deal with it. But he recognized that everyone was important, especially the ones you have to walk over to see. So, because Boaz took the time to notice who was working for him, he knew who worked for him. And that's really important, because since these people are day laborers, it wouldn't exactly always be the same group of people who are working there every day. There are probably common things about it. But he knew who worked for him. So he immediately knew that Ruth was not someone who worked for him. Because he bothered to notice everyone, he noticed someone new. And so he walks over to his foreman and says, "Who's the girl in the back there kind of gathering behind the harvesters?" And his foreman tells him that, well, she's the Moabite woman that came back with Naomi. Keep in mind, this is a small town. There wasn't even a bank, and they knew everything that was going on, right? Because that's what we say here, is that if you don't tell us by 10 o'clock, we're going to make it up. I think it's what the bank says, right? Is that in a small town, everybody knows what's going on. So simply saying that was the Moabite woman that came back with Naomi said tons. The whole town would have known that years earlier, Naomi and her kids and her husband moved away. And the whole town would have known that Naomi came back, having lost her husband and her children. And this foreign woman came back with her and was helping to take care of her. Everyone would have known that. And so everyone would understand how hard that would be for Ruth. Boaz certainly understood how hard things would be for Ruth, how challenging it was going to be. So Boaz actually intentionally walks back over to Ruth, meets her where she is, because she would never dare approach him. He walks over to her, and he offers her guidance, and he offers her support. And he tells her straight away, "We are here to help you. Each day that you need food, you come back here. And we will help you along the way. And we will help you find your way. And we will help you to get to where you need to be." So after Boaz talks to Ruth, she graciously thanks him and returns back to work. So as we pick up the narrative, when Ruth went back to work again, Boaz ordered his young men, let her gather grain right among the sheaves without stopping her. Now again, seems like he's just being nice. It's so much more than that. Because the Mosaic Law said that if in the process of harvesting, if something gets dropped, the poor are allowed to pick it up. But the sheaves is the already harvested, bundled, put aside to be processed later. But she didn't understand the rules. She says, oh, I'm allowed to pick up stuff that's dropped. Well, it's going to be really easy where all the stuff is gathered over there. So she's going to places she's not supposed to go. She's not following the rules. She's not following the cultural expectations because she didn't know what they were. And Boaz is like, don't worry about that. Tells the people around him, don't worry about that. Because she doesn't understand the rules, and we're not going to hold her up to that. This is what she needs. She's going through a process. She's making some mistakes along the way. And we're going to give her the room to do that. Because Boaz understood that her well-being was far more important than the rules. Her feeling like this was a safe place was far more important than the cultural expectations. That her getting what she needed was far more important than us deciding what we allow or won't allow here. She's on a journey. It's our job to make it easier for her. And then he goes even further. He goes on to tell them, and pull out some heads of barley from the bundles and drop them on purpose for her. Let her pick them up, and don't give her a hard time. Now, again, if we look at what's going on there, right? Tons packed in there. Kind of jump to the end. Don't give her a hard time. Well, that's a good starting point, right? That, we don't want to give her a hard time. Make sure she feels comfortable here. But the big thing they're doing is Boaz says, drop things on purpose. Make her life easier, right? Don't just allow her to do what's allowed. We've got plenty. We've got what we need. Make her journey easier. Drop things for her on purpose, allowing her to gather more food. And I think that's the key point that I want all of us to take with us from this, is that if we look at what Boaz was doing with Ruth, is that he was working hard to help her through her struggles. He was working hard to make her path easier for her. That's exactly what Jesus has called us to do. That for the people who are struggling, the people who are working through the path of faith, and it's so important to remember that when someone is transitioning to faith for the first time, there are so many hurdles to get past. Right? There are so many things to tell you that this is all dumb. How could this possibly make sense? How could there be a being that created everything? And even if it does exist, how could he care about you? Those are emotional struggles that people early in their faith journeys are battling with for real. And it will take nothing to knock them off of their journey. So we are called to drop things on purpose, make that path a bit easier, to let go of kind of cultural requirements, allow people to make mistakes. When I used to serve in prisons, guys would be praying, dropping F-bombs in the middle of their prayers. Awesome, right? They're talking to God. Let's go with it, man, right? Let's go, right? It's like, because imagine if I would have stopped and gone, oh, we don't do that when we talk to God. God can't handle that, right? It would shut everything down, right? Well, and there's a really wide berth between where we are and F-bombs and prayer, right? There's a lot of mistakes people will make. And we don't care. What we care about is them. And we use what we are given to serve them. And that includes our time. And that includes our space. That includes our closets. It includes our walls. It includes everything we have. Because we are called to step into the lives of those people who are on a journey, no matter where they are, right? Whether they are brand new, whether they've been with us for a while, whether they've moved away and are coming back. Because our purpose is to inspire people to pursue and find life in Jesus. And that first word, or second word, inspire, I choose that very intentionally. Because inspiring people to do something, it's harder, right? I can tell people to do things, right? I can say they should do things, but inspiring people takes a lot of effort, takes a lot of time. And we have to work together, but it's worth it because it works where nothing else works. That we show the good side of things and we use what we have and we walk with people when it's really hard. And we show up when others won't. Not because we want something, but because God has given us so much. It's the natural reaction to what we have received. We don't work hard to be worthy of God. We work hard because we're already worthy of God. He has already accepted us. He has already told us that you are mine. And we walk with that in confidence, serving the people around us with everything we can. So next week, we will finish up this series. And we'll finish up the book of Ruth. And as we get to the end, what we will see are the kind of amazing things that can happen when we're willing to step into the lives of others, particularly when it's not easy. And we'll see how it helps them, and we will see how it transforms us. So as we look into the week ahead and as we plan the year ahead and all those sort of things, because for our churches, this is kind of the looking into the new year time frame. I truly believe there is nothing more important than meeting the needs of people that are new to faith or transitional in faith, and we need to take every single thing we have to reach them, because I believe that is specifically what Jesus has called us to do.